If we go down to create, there is a tutorial section. The script samples is what we have down there, and if you use that, you can go and break apart their scripts. It's not the most elegant way to do it, but it is an option. So today I'd like to go through all the basics of building, just make sure that we all know how to use the tools most effectively. We're going to go really quickly through that. Then we're going to hit Gizmos, and after Gizmos, we're going to create our first script. And then from that point forward, I'd like you all to work on your own scripts and kind of figuring out which direction you'd like to head. So here we are in the world. We're going to go ahead and go into edit mode. So if everybody pulls down on their right trigger, we'll be up into edit mode. Or, yep, if you want to pull down on, there we go. Awesome, so we're all building now. And then if we click on the left hamburger icon, you're going to see your object menu, and you should see a bunch of objects in front of you. Everybody see the objects? Perfect. So let's go ahead and everybody grab their favorite object out. Scale it as you please. Awesome. Then if you put two hands inside, you can scale it bigger, smaller. Awesome. And then if you grab one of the arrows, you can scale it and elongate it or squish it. You can also put your hand in the box, go up to the arrow at the top and drag it. Rather than just scaling it, you can also move it around by dragging it in a specific direction. And if you put your hand in the box again, there's a rotate, and you can rotate it in a circle or along an axis. So when you put your hand on the arrow to scale it, so put your hand on the box and you see the yellow outline. Then in the center, there's a green dot or a blue dot or a red dot. And then that box allows you to scale, but the arrow allows you to drag. And the rotate, like noodle arrow, allows you to rotate it along an axis. So you can rotate it like that. Let's go ahead and go to the paint tab. And let's start by painting just any color. Duplicate it, and then go back to paint. Paint it with like plastic. Duplicate it again. And we're going to paint it with metal. And then duplicate it again. And then paint it with glow. And so you should get, so to duplicate on your right hand, you use the joystick to the right and you'll get the duplicate selection tool. And then when you grab and drag, you can pull out a duplicate. And then when you need to switch back, you just push forward to get back to the hand tool. Awesome. And then if you want to just try some of the different textures out, I'm just kind of running through the basics because sometimes when you get started, you don't know like all the little things, and I just want to kind of quickly touch these before we get into it. The next thing to note is there's a lock tool. So we've learned about duplicate tool to the right. If you go down to the bottom, there's a lock, and you can lock an object in place so that way you can't grab it. And so that's very useful if you're building like a ground or a tree that you don't want to move. And so then if you click it again, you can unlock it. The next thing we're going to do is click on the outside and drag through all the objects, and that allows you to select all the objects. So click and drag and then let go, and then click and drag again, and you can unselect a single object from the group. So for instance, if you're working on a large tree and you select everything and you select an apple but you didn't mean to select the apple, you can just drag through and unselect the apple. Or the opposite is more likely true, where you're selecting an apple and you accidentally select the tree, you can unselect the tree. Oh, no worries. So if we go back to the unlocking, you're going to pointer click. So once you've got the lock tool selected, yep, you got it unlocked there. Perfect. And then you go back to the hand tool to move it. And then with your hand tool, click and drag through two objects to select both of them. And then when they're both selected, you can scale them and rotate them and do all of the same attributes. There you go. Exactly. And you can also unselect. So if you let go of them, you can then unselect by clicking and dragging through the one object that you want to unselect. So if you have all four selected, for instance, for me, I can unselect the bottom one and still have 3 selected. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and go to the paint tool. So assuming you have a few different objects, if you go to the paint option, so on the left side on your right hand, so you joystick over to paint, you can just paint with what you last used. But if you want to choose a color that someone else has, like for instance, I want this color, you put your hand in theirs, but without clicking, you just left click on your joystick to select their color, and then I can pull it over. And so I could come over here and grab Hana's yellow or white now and paint. So just by putting it into the color, or if I wanted this metallic color, I could grab that and then... No problem. So just hit the undo button on your left hand. On your left hand, there's an undo by joysticking to the left. Oh, it might have already been messed with. So try it with yours though. Try moving one of your objects and then use the joystick to undo, and then try redoing as well. So you can move it and then undo it back or redo it forward. So super useful. It also works in coding. So if you remove something on accident or you... So
how are you grabbing someone else's color?
So you go to the paint tool on your right hand, put it inside their object, and then press the dropper tool by using your joystick to the left. So once you put it inside, you get an eyedropper tool on the left, and then you just joystick to the left. And then you can then click on your object to paint. Wonderful. So now let's go ahead and learn how to group. This is going to be one of the most important things you learn when scripting is grouping objects. So if you select all of your objects that are in front of you, then you put your hand inside, push to the left on your joystick on your right hand, and that will group them together. So once they're grouped, they're permanently locked together, except for, you can undo it. If you put your hand inside and then click forward onto the ... icon, that's going to bring up the properties panel. From inside the properties panel, you can use the one to the right to ungroup. So see, there's the far left is like an arrow going into an object, and the one next to that is kind of a weird grouping of objects. If you press that, it'll ungroup your objects. Let's learn how to go into a group once you've made one. So let's go make a group again, and then combine them into a group. And then we're going to open up that properties menu one more time. Hit that arrow that goes into the object. So when you click on that, everything gets grayed out around you, and you can now adjust individual objects inside your grouping, and the group stays the same. And okay, now I see it. So maybe the problem is that the object is selected for you. So try unselecting the object by right-clicking outside of and then opening the properties menu. There should be an arrow. Do you see the arrow right there? Yep, so that means you're inside of the object, and now you can adjust individual objects without affecting the whole group. So the reason this would be important is, imagine you've created like a butterfly and you're trying to add a particle effect, so when it's flying around it has a little trail flying behind it. Well, if you have it grouped, then they can be flying together, like they all stay together. Being able to go inside of the group and then exit the group is very important. If you have an object selected while you're inside of the group mode, and you leave the group, it will come out with you. So make sure you're not selecting anything when you leave the grouping, otherwise it'll be removed from the group. And the same is true if you select an object and then go into the group, it will come into the group with you. But make sure you unselect it if you want it to stay there. For instance, here's a square that's now outside of the group, but if I select it, open up the properties panel here, and then I have to select it again, and then click into the group, and now, oh, should have worked. Select. Okay, had to click it, like thoroughly click it. Now it's inside the grouping, and if I go out of the group, you can see, oh, I had it selected, which I said not to do, do as I say, not as I do. Now it's unselected, I can leave the group and now drag it around as a single object. So for instance, if I had built, a butterfly and was adding a particle effect, I could design the particle effect outside and then add it to the group. Yeah, that's a great way to do it, but often if you're working on a more complicated object, you don't want to do that. Like if you have 20 objects in a single thing, you don't have to select all 20 of them, especially if they're small. So try, now that you have a grouping, add another object to the group. What you're going to do is open up the properties menu on the group, and then go to this object, and you're going to click on it until it's highlighted. There you go. And then on this group tab, click the Go Into object. Yep.
The zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And now that you're in,
it automatically expanded.
Correct. So now drag that into your object, and then make sure to unselect it. So click outside. Okay, so now exit the group and maybe it'll become visible to me. So if you exit the group, there it is, perfect. Awesome, so now it's inside the group. And you can do the same thing to remove it from the group. The snap tool on your left hand, pull down on the joystick to highlight the snap tool, and then as you move the object around, it'll snap to degrees, and rotation, it'll also snap to amount. Go into your objects area, gear icon on the far right, you can hit build settings, and under build settings, you can adjust your snapping. So you can adjust your snap size to be 1 meter, 2 meters, 5 centimeters, and basically that's going to give you really refined control when you're building objects and making it look. So I usually keep mine at a grid snap angle of 45 degrees. We are all shadows. It is very strange. Head over to the Gizmos tab. It's underneath the Shapes tab in your build settings. Do you see the Gizmos area? All right, so we're going to start by pulling out the trigger icon. And we're going to quickly run through what all of these objects are. So just go ahead and pull out one of each. Yep. So the first thing we have is the trigger. Trigger is used to find out if an object or a player has entered into the collision area of the trigger. They're also used to make doors and teleports. They're very powerful. There's a lot you can do with them. The next step we have is the door. The door is how you create portals into other worlds like the plaza, or if you create your own worlds, you can have portals into each of your worlds so people can hop from one to the next to the next. The next one we have is our text. Our text is used for writing, so we'll open up the text right now. And so if you go into the properties menu of your text icon, you can then type into your text. And so I want everybody to type in kind of like the one thing they want to learn and like simplify it down to like 1 or 2 words. And just write that in. So I wrote down respawn because the number one thing I want to teach you guys today is respawning. And so if a player falls off the world, how are they going to get back up? I know Hannah's had some personal experience with this where she'll come into a world and her headset glitches and she falls to the bottom and is just kind of stuck there. Can't really enjoy it. So we're going to show you how to prevent that from happening. And that will require a trigger. It'll also require the next object we're going to be talking about, which is our respawn point. So that's the player looking icon. Your respawn point is how you can create teleporting. So wherever you place this is where you can teleport to via a player entering a trigger. So that's what we're going to be going through today. Next up, we have our sound recorder. I'm not going to go too much in depth with the sound recorder, but more or less inside here in the properties, you can record a 30-second audio piece. That's the maximum, so you can stop it early if you'd like. You can then loop it. You can increase the volume, decrease the volume, increase the pitch, decrease the pitch. You can decide whether to play it on start, or you can play it on a script. You can make it global or make it local and decide how far is it hearable. Maybe it's only hearable within 5 blocks. Maybe it's hearable up to 100 or even 1,000 blocks. Okay, so that's the sound recorder. And then next we have our particle effects. So you'll notice there are 2 different types of particle effects. Right now we're going to talk about the particle effects. I'd like you to open up the properties menu for your particle effects. You're going to be able to click play to preview the effect. And so it starts by defaulting at a smoke effect. This is good if you have like a gun or explosion going off. And then we can also loop that. We can also play it on start or play it on script. And then the other thing you can do is you can change it. So try changing the preset to something else, like smoke poof is the default. We can go to hit spark. You can go to hit ring, which is really nice. You can go to smoke trail, which is used for making trails of smoke like on a plane. You can go to confetti burst, and we got sparkles, which is kind of like twinkling stars. We have the water spray, which is a specific direction of water, and water burst, which goes out in all directions and is affected by gravity. So there's a lot of cool particles in there that are really great to use. Moving on, we're going to go straight into trail effects. So trail effects, if you grab it and drag it, you're going to see that it creates a trail wherever you drag it. So this is what I was talking about with, like, if you wanted a butterfly, you could have some of these trails coming out of it. If we hop in there, what you'll see is you can change the length and width. You can change the color. The colors are in an RGB scale. So 1 is red, then 1 for the next one is 100% green, and then the next one is 100% blue, or, yeah, red, green, blue. And so then any mix of that, you can look up online the specific colors. And then the end color can be adjusted as well. I recommend tapered trail is kind of my favorite. So if you change it to tapered trail, you'll notice it has this kind of like feathered end, which is really nice. It's underneath the preset. There you go. So a lot of playing around with this is to get it right when you're designing something. So sometimes it's not just right the first time. It's not like you're just gonna know 0.12 is the right width. So I recommend just kind of adjusting it until you get what you're looking for. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the next part. The next thing we have up is our environment. So that is the little cloud and sun icon. I'm not sure if we can run 4 of these in here. I'm pretty sure you're only supposed to have 1. So let's go have someone change the lighting from daytime to something else. And then whoever wants to do it first, change daytime to anything else. All right, there we go. And let's see, can anyone adjust this? Like if I change it to sunrise, so it looks like whoever clicks it latest gets that. So feel free to click the button and see what a few of these look like. You can also adjust like fog density. So here it's an overcast day, but now we can make it super foggy. I can barely see you guys. So like if you're building like an ocean scene, this might be a really good option. So I'm gonna remove the fog now. And you can turn off the grid that we've been standing on. So say goodbye to the grid. We're gonna leave the grid there for now because I like it in terms of building. It's nice to know that that's what 3 feet / a meter looks like. So it's a good reference point. You can also change the world voice settings. So if you want it to be global, close, extended, etc. And now we've got our scripts tab. And so this is what everybody is looking forward to. So we're gonna go ahead and start scripting. And so at this point, we don't need our object unless you made something you really are attached to. I was just kind of messing around with mine. So you can delete that by grabbing it and pulling down on the delete icon. So once you've grabbed an object, you can delete it when you're holding it by pulling down on your right joystick. Does everybody have the script window open? Yes, looks like it. Okay, so rename it at the top to something like respawn and your name. Just make sure you add your name to it so we can figure out who is who. Once you have it renamed, we need to figure out what is going to trigger this event. Perfect, good job everyone. So what we're going to do is go to our flag tab. So that's the events tab. It's the first one on the left on the right side. And if you look down here, it should be there open by default. We have when trigger is entered by player. So I want you to grab that and drag it over. Once you have that dragged over, I want you to take the when world is started, grab it and delete it by grabbing it and pulling down just like you would with an object. Okay, so now that we all have when event trigger enters with player, that is what's going to happen. So when we have a trigger, we have to tie this script to the trigger. But when that trigger is entered by a player, it's going to send this, whatever we have as an action. So what we want to do is go to the second tab over. So if you go to the one that has a bunch of arrows, the motion tab, under the motion tab, if we arrow down just once, you'll see at the top we have player motion. And I want you to drag respawn player over. And that will give us when trigger enters with player is received, respawn with parameter on self. So you remember the duplicate tool from earlier. It also works inside of scripts somewhat. And so what you're going to do is grab duplicate and see where it says player. So when trigger enters with player, what we want to do is take that player. So you're going to duplicate the player name and you're going to drag it to respawn, and where it says parameter, put down player. So now what it should say is action respawn with player on self. Let me know when you have that. We actually don't want to respawn this on self because this code is going to be running on the trigger. So the trigger is what's triggering this, therefore this has to run on the trigger. And because of that, we now need to tie it into a respawn location. So what I want you to do is go to the far right hashtag on the top right, and that's our variables tab. When you get over there, I want you to create a new variable and then hit number and change it to object. So when you tap on number drop down, you're going to get object as an option. And when you select object, go ahead and name that respawn point. And you can simplify it. You don't have to write it in full. Just respawn PT, it works for me. So once you have that, go ahead and grab it. You don't need to use the duplicate tool. You can just use the hand tool for this and drag that over onto the word self. So this is going to replace self with the respawn point. So now that we have that, let's close out of our script. So you can hit the exit button, and now we're going to grab our trigger. If you deleted your trigger from earlier, bring in a new trigger and bring in a new spawn point. So we're going to create a trigger and a spawn point. And if you have anything extra open that you don't need, I'd recommend deleting it at this time. Please keep your text open. We will be using that in a moment. Go into the properties of the trigger. So when you open up the properties of the trigger, we're going to go and make sure it says enabled on. So as long as it's enabled, it's going to trigger, and make sure it's triggering on players. So that should be the default. Once you have that confirmed, at the bottom, you see where it says attached script? I want you to hit the drop down and choose the one that's yours. Now I want you to open up the respawn point and open up the properties panel for that. And once you've opened up the properties panel for your respawn point, you'll see where it says attach script. You don't need to attach a script to this, but you will see a reference cable. And so if you click on the little doohickey thing where it says reference, you can drag that down to the respawn point under attach script on the trigger. And once you've done that, it will now say respawn point, spawn point. Grab any shape and make it any color. And that's just going to represent your spawn point. I guess I probably should go with a less default color than just, there we go. All right, and then go ahead and bring your block down to the bottom. And once you've brought your block down to the bottom, bring your respawn point and set it on top of your block. And then grab your trigger and put it in front of your block. We're going to go into the properties of our respawn point one more time. And at the top where it says spawn on start, make sure to turn that off. Otherwise, it's going to be very disorienting trying to figure out which one to go to. Okay, so now if we all go into play mode, to get into play mode, use your left trigger and press forward. So there's a little bit of a glitch, and unfortunately it didn't fix, where it spawns you on your latest created spawn point. Hence you guys spawned over there. But now when you walk into your trigger, where you placed your trigger, it'll respawn you at the place where you put your spawn point. So give that a try. Perfect. Han, is yours working?
Good.
Okay. Okay, let me go take a look. I'm going to start with you, Hannah. So if we go into your trigger, it looks like you forgot to attach the script to your trigger and instead put it on your spawn point. So you just need to swap that around, okay? So I'm trying to figure out if it's a script problem or something else. It seems like it must be something else because my code is also not working. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to delete your trigger and delete your respawn point and try putting the code on a brand new object trigger and object respawn point. Give that a try. Try deleting those two objects because I'm pretty sure it's with these objects, not the script, as my script also didn't work. And as we can see, my script is working over there.
Like the spawn point and the trigger.
Yep, and just create a brand new respawn point and a brand new trigger. All right, so over here, you're doing pretty good, yes? So I want to show you kind of some more advanced things you can do with your spawn point. So if you go into the settings of your spawn point, you'll notice underneath set position, you can change the player's gravity, and you can also change the player's speed. If you get motion sick easily, do not increase the speed too high, but feel free to mess with those settings as you please and just see kind of how it affects it. I've used like lower gravity to represent being underwater. So if you teleport someone underwater, it makes them feel more like they're floating around. And if you use high player speed, you can use that for if they're like pretending to be in a car. So you could design like a race car and it would be like they're, racing around a track. Perfect, that all looks good. So come down and hey, it works. So there was just something wrong with those two objects. Maybe there was some setting wrong, or maybe there was just something else, but obviously it works now. So obviously this is very powerful, but let's go take this a step further. So I see Mike has particle effects on his list, and you've got script basics, so we're definitely going through the basics, so good there. And particle effects, let's say when someone teleports, we want there to be particle effects from where they teleport. not in a specific location, because we could just add those particle effects there and just turn them on when they go through. But let's actually make it so that the particle effects move to the player's position. So I want you to first start by making your respawn point really large. Not super tall like this one, but just really wide. So I'm going to shorten mine and then make it extra wide. And so this way there's a large area in which we're going to be running these particle effects. Okay. And if you're going to have the, like mine over here, you'll notice the object was in the area. So I'm making mine object taller, so that way the player isn't standing in the trigger, therefore re-triggering it over and over again. What we want to do is create a particle effect. So your choice of particle effect, and I'm going to go ahead and say that the person is going to turn into a burst of confetti. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to run it on the start, so I turn play on start off. Looping is off. And now we're going to go write the code to utilize this burst of confetti. And you guys can use whatever particle effect you want. So let me know when you have your particle effects ready. What we're going to do inside of our script is when trigger enters with player, we've done respawn player, but we want to do something a little like right before we respawn the player. So we've been to the second motion tab. So if you go to the third tab called actions, so third tab is the actions tab. And if you scroll down one, you're going to see play visual effects under particles and trails. Grab the play visual effects and put it right above the action respawn. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to play these visual effects. We need to go to the variables tab, that's the top far right tab, and we're going to create a new variable, which will be an object, and this will be the visual effect. So I'm just going to use VFX for my object name, and then you drag that over and replace self. So now it says play visual effects on VFX. If we wanted to play that visual effect in a single location, like maybe you wanted it to play at the top where they respawn. So if you wanted the visual effect to play right where they're going to spawn at, you could just move the visual particle effects into that position. But because we want this to play where the player comes into the trigger, we're going to have to first move the particles to that position. So go to the second tab, that motion tab, and at the top, you'll see move to. So under instant motion, we're going to grab move to, and that goes right before play visual effects. What we need to do is drag over the VFX onto the self spot again. Anyway, self doesn't always apply, like very rarely, but sometimes it does. Now what we want to do is next to the variables and next over, we'll see a plus equals divide. So that's our operations tab. Head over there, and we're going to scroll down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, quite a big scroll there, and you're going to see player, position of player. So we're going to go ahead and drag position of player onto the place where it says vector 100. So now that we've replaced the move to vector position with player position, we can now set which player it is and where on the player we want this effect to spawn. So for this case, we need to go back to the duplicate tool, grab player and pull that down where it says position of player. We need to fill that in with the actual player. Feel free to adjust this how you'd like. I'm going to put my effects on the feet because they run upwards for mine, but you can adjust that how you'd like. So if we've all got that, we're going to go down to our properties menu for the trigger. And now when you open it up, you're going to notice there is a new spot to attach VFX. So we're going to go open up our VFX properties, grab the little wire doohickey, and pull that down and connect it, and it'll now say VFX prototype particle effects. Wonderful. So now if we go in as a player, and just a quick trick to spawn in as a player where you want to spawn in, all you have to do is point and hold rather than just tapping it. So if you point and hold, you get a little arrow that allows you to point where you'd like to respawn. So once you've respawned in, I'm going to walk towards mine. I've respawned, the confetti went off. So obviously this isn't a real use case, but this is a good example of how to use it. That's great. So we've done particles, we've got some scripting basics under Hans, is there anything else you guys want to learn today? Yeah, let's go ahead and do that real quick. That'll take just a few seconds. So let's go ahead and change all of ours. No, we'll leave these the same. But I recommend we shrink these down a little bit. So I'm going to make mine only go around the base of this. That way the players aren't getting trapped at the top as we have been. And so I recommend we start by duplicating our current script because there's a lot we can carry over. So once you've duplicated your new script, we're going to call this VFX on object. And then don't forget to put your name in it. Create a different event. So when we've currently got it set up when event triggers with a player, but now we want it to trigger with an object. So if you go to the Events tab, right before you see player, you'll see when trigger is entered by object. So let's go ahead and drag when event trigger enters with object is received. And then we can drag the move to and play visual effects over. We don't need to keep the respawn script. We can delete that. And now we can delete this top section, the when event triggers with players. So just pull that off and delete it. Awesome. And now you'll notice that there is no player, so it's trying to spawn this at a player's foot, but that's not what we want. So if we go back to the operations tab, the plus equals divide x tab, we can scroll down and you'll see object transformation. It's about midway through the scrolling. And the first one is position of object. So we want to go ahead and grab position of object, and you can just drag that onto the word position for the player position, and it'll replace it with a position of object. And then you do the same thing we did with the player, which is grab the duplicate tool and pull object down. And now it'll move to the position of object and then play visual effects. If you go to the variables tab, you can delete the other variable, the spawn point. We only need the VFX variable. What we need to do now is create a new trigger and a new object. So let's go ahead and close out of our script and go into our build tab, and we're going to grab a new trigger. Make it a decent size, doesn't really matter how big it is, but just big enough. And then grab a new shape. Doesn't matter what type of shape you grab, I'm going to grab a noodle. And then in your noodle, you're going to go into the properties tab, or whatever object you choose. We want it to be visible, collidable, but we want to make this one interactive. So go ahead and click interactive, and we're going to go ahead and make it grabbable and physics. So you're going to hit the both option. Under gravity, let's go ahead and set it to be whatever you'd like. Metal is nice because it's heavy. You could do rubber ball if you want it to bounce. So quite a few options in here. I'm going to stick with metal for mine. And then, now that we have that done, we need to go to the second tab. We go to the Attributes tab, and under Attributes, we tag the object. So go ahead and tag it any letter or anything. So I'm going to call mine noodle. And so once you've tagged it, we can now interact with the trigger, which we'll get to in just a second. Before we do that, let's go to the More tab and go through a couple of the basics here on the More tab. So under More, you can make it two-handed grab or only single-handed grab by changing it on and off. That's the two-handed grab tab. You can also use a grab anchor to make a specific point where the object can be grabbed. I'm not going to affect anything right now, but these are just some of the basic options that you might want to consider. Is if you use a grab anchor, when the person grabs it, like say it's a sword, you're not going to be able to grab it on the blade, you'll only be able to grab it on the hilt. So it's kind of useful depending on the situation and how much flexibility you want to give the player. Under our trigger, we're going to have it on, but instead of being on players this time, we're going to change it to objects tagged. And then you put the object tag, the same one you just created. So for me, it's noodle. So I'm just going to type in noodle here. Yep, the one that you typed in prior. Unfortunately, you can't use like multiple object names. You can't add a comma or anything. Hopefully that'll be added in the future. But for now, you either have to create multiple triggers, or what I recommend is just using the same name for objects, even if it doesn't really make sense. So now what we're going to do is get the correct, so VFX on object lakes is mine. So go ahead and grab the script and attach it. And once you've done that, you're going to need to create another particle effect. We're going to open up the properties menu, and under properties, we can change it to whichever one you'd like. So in my case, I'm going to do a water burst, and then we just grab our little reference and connect that under VFX on our trigger. And now we just need to place our trigger down. So now if I come down as a player, grab my object, and then walk into here. Oh, well, put mine a little too close. But as you can see, when it enters, it creates a water burst. And so that's how when an object is triggered, it creates a burst. But you could do the opposite. So say you wanted a bullet to hit an object and create a particle effect. Well, you'd add the trigger to the bullet object. So remember how I was talking about you can go into object groups? Well, you'd add it and make it a group. So the bullet becomes this group of object plus the trigger. And then when the trigger hits another object that's been tagged with, so say it's tagged wall, or maybe it's tagged like zombie or something like that, then a particle effect goes off on collision. And so it's the same thing, just kind of in reverse. Okay, no problem if you want to hop off. We're just going to do another quick code. So we're going to grab two trigger objects. So these two trigger objects are going to represent our start and end point. So what we're going to do is create an object that moves from the start point to the end point. And so you can imagine you're working on your meteor. I'm going to go ahead and make a floating platform, kind of like an elevator. So you're going to create your object. So in my case, it's just going to be a short floating platform. Then we got the two position points. And so this code is very similar to the ones we've already made, except for instead of using move to, we're going to use move to over time. Once you have your script open, go ahead and label it move. I made a new one actually. You could use the one from before. It's not as relevant in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the when world is started event. So we're not going to be using a trigger enduring or anything like that. In this case, this motion is going to happen from world start. You could obviously change that if you were making your meteor, but in this case, we're going to do when world is started. And what we're going to do is start by adding a move to command. So that's on page 2, but make sure you grab the second tab down where it says motion over time. So you're grabbing move to over time. And we're going to need 2 of those. So go ahead and grab a second one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab onto the events tab, and you're going to grab when event is received. It's the second one down right underneath when world is started. So we're going to do when my event is received, when my event is received. So we need 2 of these as well. And then you're going to grab the move action. So then you're going to grab those move actions and drag them each under one of the events. So it'll say when event, my event is received, move to, position, on self. And this is actually a good example of when on self is relevant, because this will apply to the platform or whatever object you create. So let's go create some variables. So once you've got that, we're going to go to the variables tab, and we're going to create 2 variables. They're both going to be objects, and it's going to be trigger 1 and trigger 2. And these are both objects. Interestingly, if you connected this trigger into a moving object, like say the noodle that I created or whatever object you had created, if you added that trigger into your object, the motion would be moving based on where that object had been moved to. So you could say have a platform moving off to a location that's in motion, which is quite interesting. Let me figure out, what did I do? My keyboard has numbers at the top. So,
Mine has symbols on top.
oh, try hitting shift. You probably had shift or cap selected. And so if you unselect it, it'll,
Oh, it was canceled.
no worries. Okay, so now that you have your 2 variables, we want to go to our operations tab. That's the plus, equals, divide, multiply. And we're going to scroll down and grab position of object. And we're going to replace our vector with position of object on both of our move to commands. And once you have that, then we just need to drag in trigger 1 as object 1 and trigger 2 as object number 2. We're going to go back to the variables tab, and this time we're going to create a number variable, so you don't need to change it. But this number variable is going to be called time. Now our time variable, you can now adjust the variable number inside of the variables tab. So it starts as a default of 0. I'm going to make mine 5 seconds. Now from inside your object, you can actually adjust this. So if you said 5 wasn't good enough, or you want it to be longer or shorter, you could adjust that. from inside the object without having to go into the code, which is the benefit of making it a variable. Plus, we can use it across multiple without having to change it multiple times. The next thing we need to do is allow this to loop. So to create a loop, we're going to go back to the first flag, the Events tab, and we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom. So at the very bottom, you're going to see two things that we need: send event to object and send event with delay. So we're going to go ahead and grab send event to object first. So when world is started, send event to object. That's going to run our first my event, but now we need to run our second my event. So what we want to do is grab send event with delay, and we're going to put that underneath the first action, which is trigger 1. So it says action move to position of trigger 1. We're going to place send event with delay underneath that one. And we're also going to put send event with delay underneath trigger 2. So we're going to make another one of those and put it under trigger 2. And so to make this move back and forth, what we want to do is make sure that the second sending of event, so when my event is received the first time, and we have position trigger 1, underneath that, change my event to be custom name. So if you click on the drop down, change the event name to custom, and I'm just going to go my2, so my2, and then the next when event received, change it from my event to my2 again. So my2. I try to keep it simple. Sometimes naming can be really important on large codes, but for simple codes like this, it's fine to keep it simple. Once you have that renamed, we need to go back to our variables tab and create one new number variable. This new number variable is going to be called hold time. And this is going to be the amount of time that the platform or whatever object you're creating stays put before moving on again. So once you create that, I'm going to set mine to 2 seconds. And so if we go to our operations tab, you're going to see there's a plus sign at the bottom. And if you drag that over onto the hold time, it's going to replace it with an A plus B. So once you see A plus B, we go to our variables and we're going to grab time as A and hold time as B. So this is going to add the two together to give us enough time for the object to finish its motion. This is great. So now that we have this, it's time to apply our script to the object. So we're going to go ahead, close out of our script, go into the properties of our object, and we're going to make it animated. Make that animated, then click attach script. And so once you tie your triggers into your script, you should have an object that moves between the two triggers. Okay, perfect. And now it works. And you'll see it goes all the way into the trigger before waiting a couple seconds, and then it'll come back to the other trigger. So,
Can we save these scripts and use them later?
yeah, absolutely. So you're a part of this world, and so you can actually import this world into any of your own worlds. And so what I want to do during our class is continue developing this world. So if you want to come back here over the next week and continue working on this and making changes, like for instance, with this, for your meteor, you don't want the meteor to move backwards. You'd actually want to change this not to be move to, you'd actually want to change it to be not move to over time, but just move to. So remember our original move to command moves it instantaneously. And if you could move your meteor back to a hidden off-world area and then it comes firing down, every 5 minutes, that would be kind of a nice loop. So that's one way you could use this. Thank you guys so much for coming. We got a lot in today. I mean, this is a lot further than I thought we'd get. So I'm really happy we got to do all this. Thank you guys for staying on. And over the next week, feel free to come in here, mess around, add additional scripts, build additional objects. Like if you want to work on something specific next week and you want to design something in here that you can use, create an object. Like we've just been kind of using filler objects, but if you want to make something that actually looks pretty, I'd like to kind of target our class in a direction where we can release this world when we're done. Awesome. So I look forward to seeing you guys. In the meantime, if you have any questions, don't feel free to ask online or in chat. And if you see me online, you're welcome to ask me questions as well.